Your Excellency, Ambassador Haim Divon, thank you for the honor of joining us at the Hague Summit, International Law and Human Rights, and for your speech. We just want to ask you a few questions in order to hear your thoughts and opinions on some current issues.
Absolutely.
Firstly, you address the role of international human rights law in human development. What recommendations would you give for strengthening the capacity for international law to encourage the universal adoption of human rights?
Well, first of all, more awareness. I mean, for years, international law was kind of marginalized. It is more kind of with a philosophical aspect, but we see more and more of it coming into the mainstream of diplomacy, but that's not enough. It has to be part of, a major part, not only of diplomacy, but public discourse, because it affects, in a way, every aspect of our life. I mean, today, if you look at East and West, haves and haves not, a lot has to do with human rights, because, I touch one aspect, which is talking about the, people that they don't have access to either water, food, health, education. People not necessarily referring to human rights again, but as a development challenge, but this is basic human right that is not being addressed as such. And I always said, years back, before looking at the terrible, dramatic, horrible developments. I mean, I'm in this business, in this line of development for close to 20 years when I was ambassador to Ethiopia, to Sri Lanka, even before. And I knew that if the gap will never close, if human rights, basic human rights, are not being addressed, everyone, not only those who suffer will pay a price, but the entire planet will pay a price, because you cannot afford a growing gap between the haves and haves not. This is ingredients for instability, for crime, illegal immigration, drugs, arms, terrorism, and we don't want to get there, but it's happening because I've seen it there. For example, I lived in Ethiopia as an ambassador, but I also traveled Africa, for example, quite extensively. And when you go to those villages and they can't grow anything, and they're so desperate that they leave, and you see villages one after the other, only women, children, and elderly. You don't see men, and many times women of the working age. You know that there is a catastrophe over there. So not only that people are hungry, number one, which is bad enough, but those who are looking for better, greener pastures, and they'll do everything. Nothing will stop them, because they have to feed themselves and they have to feed their families. They want to send money. They'll do everything, and you don't want to get them. So that's why you get trafficking of women. That's why you get child labor. That's why you get all those horrible things. And the basic human rights, which is dignity, health, education, food security, they're only addressed, or the emphasis is to address them as development challenge, not as human rights challenge, and that has to be changed.
Interesting, thank you. This is kind of always the hot question when we're talking about human rights. Do you see human rights as a predominantly cultural issue? And do you think we can find the balance between universal human rights law and respect for individual cultures at the same time?
Yes, but you have to address it, because you cannot say, well, it's not politically correct, etc. Either you talk about, for example, equal rights for women, but you say, well, we do not touch certain cultures because it is not the case this way. You cannot, everyone has to have the right for education, but in certain cultures it's not the case, and therefore we are not saying a thing. If you're not addressing it, see today what is the result. I mean, when we talk about equality, it's empowerment of women. It's, you cannot allow abuse of any kind. These are human rights. What we see in Geneva, and when we go back to a little bit of the political aspect, is in many cases, unfortunately, it's abuse of human rights. And when you see those countries who are sitting on members of the council, you say, what's going on in this crazy world? Up till, Gaddafi, when he was alive, he was a council member, because that's political. So he is a council, Libya is a council member, and they are passing or endorsing or initiating anti-Israeli resolution. So it is actually abusing and politicizing an issue which is so, so important. And that has to be changed, not in enforcing, but everyone has to understand that it's each and every one of us, they're our interest, our collective interest as a collective and as individual. This is what has to be done. And I hope that, for example, seminars, such as this one, on what the question that you're asking, and later on it will be, I don't know where you're going to screen it, but I think just to give, for people to think, because human rights, we talk about mainly Geneva. It's important, but Geneva became so politicized. And does Geneva address those issues? I'm not saying not to address the other issues which they're addressing. I'm not saying. But where are the priorities? They're not being discussed at all. And something has to be done about it.
Definitely, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, moving on. As the ambassador of Israel to the Netherlands and regarding the Gaza conflict, which is very well known, have you noticed a change in attitude or opinion towards Israel?
To a certain extent, unfortunately, yes, because people see images on television, you're shocked by images, you don't know the root cause. When Israel was bombarded for months, for years, and we exercised restraint, you and no one should experience rockets being launched. Whether they're sophisticated or not, it's irrelevant, because when rocket is being launched, all the kids, everyone has to go in 15 seconds to find a shelter. Everyone has drills. Imagine how it affects the childhood of young kids. That was a reality. But the fact that we have been able to build shelters, to have drills, that there will be hardly any loss of life or injuries, it didn't make it to the news, because the headlines are looking for blood. If it's not a dramatic headline, you'll never see it. So finally, when we said enough is enough, what do you see? You see us having to defend ourselves, exercising our right for self-defense, and then people say, hey, what's going on here? I mean, look how absurd things are when Hamas, a terrorist organization, is actually part of the PA, because they're supposed to have a kind of a unity government. They're going to the ICC, so a body that part of it is a terrorist organization which is purposely endangering their own people by having the rocket launchers in hospitals, in mosques, in schools, hoping that we are going to retaliate and hit as many civilians as possible, so we will be criticized, condemned. How cynical, how cruel it is to use children, civilians, as human shields. And in the most heavily condensed area in the world, probably most heavily populated area in the world, the Gaza Strip, you are trying your best. There's no way that here and there, unfortunately, civilians will be hurt. And if you look at 60 days of fighting or more, every loss is a tragedy. But if you look at the intensity of the war, the numbers are again, it's a tragedy, but the number not big when you compare it to any other crisis. I mean, look today, Syria, 230, the figure today is over 200,000. 200,000, can we digest 200,000 civilians being killed? Any debate? So we always feel that, this is, okay, where another opportunity to bash Israel, to condemn Israel, etc., either by deflecting and let focus on Israel and not on what whoever they are, the wrongdoing of others, or just for political reason. And this is something that is totally unacceptable to us, and therefore, and especially when the chairman of a commission, first of all, we have an issue with the Geneva Human Rights Commission, because it was always biased, singling out Israel, and this is the danger when you're politicizing such an important body, at the end of the day, it's becoming irrelevant. Although it's supposed to do the most important thing and protect and promote human rights, but real human rights violation, and not pick on us as part of a kind of a political campaign. That's number one. And then we say not only that we have issue with Human Rights Commission, which, as I said, more anti-Israeli resolution than Iran, North Korea, Syria combined. I mean, how can it be more absurd than that? But when they decided to appoint Professor Shabbos, we said, are you out of your mind? I mean, he just stated in public that Netanyahu, that he's supporting the Palestinians, that Netanyahu should be brought to ICC. So how impartial could he be? But no one listens to us because, of course, the Israelis will be against it. And only now, when it was revealed that actually he was contracted by the Palestinians to write an opinion 2 years ago, legal opinion, I think it reflects so badly on human rights on commission in Geneva, and therefore maybe someone should think of a new structure. Clean up the act, because at the end of the day, we're all losing by having a political rather than professional body really looking into it from all aspects. I think it's the loss of all of us.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. And lastly, how would you define in your own words cultural diplomacy, and what role do you think that cultural diplomacy can play in promoting human rights?
Cultural diplomacy is to understand that, it's a very delicate fabric that makes us a global village, and that we have to live with one another, reach out by understanding, but at the same time not to compromise over the basic human rights, the basic requirements of each and every human being, all the way from equality to food security, etc., taking into consideration that there are, different cultures, different approaches, but there has to be one solid base. And if some of the institutions here or elsewhere accept the fact that, there are certain cultures that you have to treat differently, and if there's no common denominator, if there's no unified approach that everyone has to abide by, then forget it. It will never work, because some people say, in our culture, that's fine. Or in our culture, women are not supposed to drive cars, or in our culture, women or young girls are not going to school. And people are not talking about it. People are not saying, hey, this is totally unacceptable. Okay, how to, don't impose. It has to be working with leadership, convincing people that things have to be changed. But is this effort being made? Do we see an effort that is taking into account sensitivities, but at the same time saying there's no other way? If your society, if you want your people to do well, no society will do well if 50% the women are not working, are not part of the labor market. No society will do well if the mothers are illiterate, because how the mother will help her children do homework, how the mother will have an opportunity to read a book or a story to her children. Just take this little aspect. If the mother is illiterate, what kind of a family will be? And she is the mother of a family. And this is what's happening in so many parts of the world. And then we say, this is the backwardness, that people are poor, etc. Let's find where it's coming from. And again, her basic human right of access to education was denied. What was done about it? What was done about it? Practically zero. Instead of, but there has to be kind of approach. And when you look at what is being discussed, how much energy is being spent in all the very noble institutions, whether here in the UN, etc., and you say, why all the energy and efforts and money? Why we do not prioritize the needs? Because when we're going to have a planet of 9 billion, 11 billion, when people don't have access to water, to food, to education, I don't want to try even to predict what's going to happen. It will be on your responsibility and your shoulder, and it's not funny. So I think this is something that we have to address, and this is something that we have to think of. On one hand, not imposing, but at the same time, making it clear that this is the direction, or one of the directions that has to be taken. And what happens? It becomes a platform. Even such a great event, one of the former speakers, the MP from Ireland, she turned it into political bashing, ugly rhetoric. Did it advance the cause of anyone? Did it really make a difference? Is it in the direction of planting a seed to make a difference? No. It became a platform for bashing, for political objectives. Now, okay, maybe you need that, but you'll not advance, for example, some of the issues that we were discussing right now.
Well, on behalf of the ACD, we want to thank you. It was very interesting, your answers. So thank you very much for the time and for
Thank you for the
speaking with
questions.
us.
And if you'll tell me that you'll give it a thought, I'll be happy.
Yes,
Definitely.
always.
Okay,
Thank you
very
so
much.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.